Okay, welcome everybody. Happy Wednesday. My name is Casey Bowser. I am the archivist for the Sisters of Charity of Seton Hill. I'm also currently the past president of ACWR. And I just want to welcome you today for joining us for our 6th webinar in our leadership-centered webinar series, Knowledge is Power, Exploring the Results and Impact of the CARA Women Religious Archives Survey. So we have a lot of material to cover today. If you were on the last webinar, you had a little preview of this presentation, but we're going to dig a little deeper, talk about how ACWR hopes to use the survey, as well as how you might utilize the survey within your own repository. So, and then our hope today is that we will cover the presentation and then have some time available for Q&A at the end. So please utilize the chat function for that as well. And I guess we're still letting folks in here, but we will get started. So first, I want to set the scene a little bit today about this presentation. There were a number of collaborators involved in forming this survey project, ACWR certainly, but representatives of ARC, Boston College, HARC, Santa Clara University, Women Religious Archives Collaborative in Cleveland, Sisters of Charity Foundation, as well as LCWR and CMSWR. They've been very supportive of this effort. So we want to make sure to acknowledge those folks. Now, I hope all of you did answer the survey, but I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into why we supported this survey project. So really how this came about was in early 2021 and mid 2021, ACWR, the board, we were looking at our strategic planning process, our mission and our vision in light of the current realities facing women religious archivists. And we kept coming back to this question, where is the data? Where is the data about our current realities? And how can we utilize this data to form a strategic plan? And how can we legitimize something like a national survey to not only inform our efforts, ACWR's efforts, but also help educate our leadership, other archivists, the archival community, scholars, any other kinds of stakeholders and constituents that might have a vested interest in the future of women religious archives. So we thought, what's the best way to do this? So in October of 2021, we made contact with Sister Pat Whitberg, who has been a great friend of ours with the Sisters of Charity of Cincinnati, and she works for CARA. And she's been working for them for a number of years. So we met with her and we met with CARA and we talked about this idea, and they were very, very supportive. Father Tom Gaunt, who leads CARA, as well as their associates there, they were very excited about this idea. They're very supportive of women religious archives and history. So that's where we really initiated the conversation. And then in late December of 2021, Sister Susan Durkin, who is leading the Cleveland Collaborative Initiative, as well as those other collaborators I've already mentioned, they were in conversation about solutions and funding for their own repository projects. They got in contact with us, where we started to talk then about how we can make this a collaborative survey. We can fulfill a number of our organizational needs and really work towards this national effort to really make some changes happen and some conversation happen at the national level related to women religious archives. So early in this year, 2022, we worked to develop the survey with CARA. And luckily with Sister Susan's connections and the Sisters of Charity Foundation, the Hilton Foundation agreed to fund the survey project. So the Hilton Foundation graciously funded this project for us. So we are very happy about that and happy that they were interested in this project. We circulated, of course, the survey in April. And then by September, October of this year, CARA had completed the survey results. And we are now working on a special report that will be circulated by CARA, which is essentially a more formal written version of the survey that you can then share with your leadership, your archivists, anyone who's interested in this topic. That's to be released in early 2023. We hope January. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. So let's look at some of these survey results. And in the initial survey, if you may remember, we had a section that was for leadership and a section that was for archivists to kind of get both perspectives and responses based on those two folks in the congregations. So we really needed some data about, you know, where are the congregations at right now as a whole, not just within the archives, but as a whole. And so some of our first questions were related to membership. And some of the data that came out, and it should not be surprising to most of us, is that the majority of the communities of women religious in the United States have fewer than 100 members. So with these statistics, we see that 72%, a little more than 72%, have fewer than 100 members. And then, you know, the minority 19% have more than 100 members. And in some of these statistics, you'll see that there's an option for no response. That means that somebody answered part of the survey, but didn't answer certain questions. Okay, so you'll see that a few times in this presentation. Now, alongside this membership question, we asked a question about age of members, average age of members. So we were able to see, again, that the majority of community members of women religious are over the age of 70. And actually the majority are over the age of 80. And within those statistics, it seemed as though the median age was exactly around 80. So the median age is 80, and there are fewer than 100 members in the majority of communities. Now, one important question that we put on this survey was to ask if communities were currently merging or closing. Not that they plan to in the future, but is it an active reality for them, right? So 15% said yes. That was roughly 32 communities are in the active process of coming to completion. Okay, this is important for us to think about and know in terms of the short-term reality of archives, right? So will there be 32 communities within the next year or 2 or 3 that need to transition in some way? And do they have a plan for that transition? Those are the big questions that we're going to get to next. And bear in mind, I want to mention too, this presentation, the recording, as well as this PowerPoint, we will make available to you. You'll be able to get it on the ACWR website, and certainly also the actual full survey results. And then, of course, the special report when we have that available. We will circulate that to you. Here was the big question for me, or one of the big questions for me. And this was a question related to the overarching congregation, not just the archive. And the question was, do you have a plan that anticipates downsizing, merging, or closing? And as you can see from these responses, 53%, which represented 112 communities, said no. Okay. Then we also had several communities, and this was leadership that was answering this question. Several communities that said that they don't know. And then there were a number of communities that said it didn't apply or didn't respond. Okay. The minority said that they do have a plan. They do have an overarching plan. One thing I want you to bear in mind when you see this 112 communities don't have a plan. This survey was circulated to 522 communities. We had a 40% response rate. CARA had a 40% response rate. That's actually very good in terms of response rates overall. But really, when we're looking at these statistics, we are seeing about half of what we probably would normally be seeing, right? So when it says 112 communities, I would double that and say it's likely twice as many don't have a plan, because less than half responded, right? So if we're looking at the stats, it's probably reasonable to say, actually, it's very likely double that number, okay? And I am a lay archivist for a women religious archive. And as a lay employee, I have to say that these statistics are staggering. This idea that the majority of communities don't have a plan or don't know if they have a plan overall for their congregations, right? It's not just the archives, but for the community, for the finances, for the properties, the ministries, etc. So this is a really startling statistic to see. But one thing we do know, and this is an encouraging number, 86% of congregations have an archive, okay? 86% have an archive of some kind, all right? So this is good. This is news that, women religious are aware that they should have an archive. They should be caring for records. But let's bear this number in mind then when we think about future planning, right? Okay. So then the next question, of course, was a follow-up to the previous question. What about the archives? Do you have a long-term plan for the archives? Again, the majority don't have a plan or don't know if they have a plan yet. 32%, this was an encouraging number, but 32% did have a plan. And some, we did ask for the leadership to describe that plan if they had one, and many communities are working with, with a charism-based collaborative. Some of them are working with an existing repository. Others are discerning what they want to do, but they're in the process. So that was very encouraging to see. But again, it's very, very sobering to look at this number of, at the very least, 100 communities, and very likely it's twice that number. So, if we're looking at 200 communities that don't have a long-term plan for their archive, that is a concerning and unprecedented crisis. And as a lay archivist, this is something that other archivists in other archival fields are not dealing with, at least not on this kind of scale. Okay, so this is definitely a big deal, and I'm sure many of you know that. So one important question that we had as part of this survey was, if you plan to transition your archive, how long do we have? So when do you anticipate that transition to occur? And of course, we gave several options. We had a few of those communities that said they were actively coming to completion. So a few of those are represented within the 1-year time frame or the 3 to 5 year time frame. As you can see, based on these statistics, if we just looked at 5 to 10 years and under, well over 70, I think 82 communities anticipate transitioning their archive within 10 years. Again, with the 40% response rate, it's very likely double that number, right? We're looking at 150, 160 communities having to transition their archive in the next decade. And as I said of late, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it is that time flies. And although 10 years seems like a long time and like a lot of time, it's not actually that much time. And with planning, future planning for archives, especially if you're planning to transition the archive, it does take years of planning, years of work to prepare for this inevitability, okay? Interestingly, with this statistic too, and with CARA, we talked about why this was the case. You can see 87 communities, 41% of the respondents did not give a response to this question. And CARA wasn't sure how to interpret that, because are they interpreting it as the communities don't anticipate transitioning the archive? Or is it that they just don't know what the timeline is, so they didn't give an answer? And if that's the case, again, you've got 87 additional communities that may or may not be fitting within that 10-year timeline. Okay, so this was as kind of a strange response. There were far more blank responses for this question than any other question. And so, it's kind of up in the air how to interpret that. We think it's very likely that people just don't know, whether it's the archivist or the leader, they just don't have any idea of what the actual timeline would look like. So again, very likely these numbers are much higher than this is even showing here. Okay, I previewed this again at the last meeting, but I think it's worth looking at again. We asked leadership in particular, if they were to transition their archive to another repository, what would be the preferred options? And we gave, this choice is very interested, somewhat, a little, or not at all. And as might be expected, the two most popular options for women religious archives were regional collaboratives and charism-based. And so you can see it's interesting how the statistics kind of play out, but between very interested and somewhat, regional collaboratives were very popular, and we've seen several of these emerge of late. And of course, charism-based, which has been, again, another popular option, and there are several communities that are discussing whether a charism-based archive is a possibility for them. The third most popular option were academic, college, or university archives. There was still great interest in those as options. And then the two final selections here were diocesan archives and then local archives of some kind, what museums, historical societies, other kinds of archives in your area. Those were considerably less popular. So as we can see, and this is where the trends are headed. So this was, again, not surprising, but regional collaboratives, charism-based, and then academic archives. And the interesting thing, I think, to note about these responses, and again, these are responses from the leadership primarily, regional collaboratives and charism-based archives require the buy-in and the dedication of the leadership at the leadership level. The archivists, I know our archivists, we can talk all about charism-based archive. We can talk all about wanting to join a regional collaborative, but it really does take the archivists and the leadership and other, valued stakeholders working together very, very actively to make these things come to fruition. The difference with academic archives is that they're typically associated with an existing institution and repository. So in some ways, it's easier to transition to those repositories because the space exists, the staff exists, the institutional funding may be behind it. With some of these other groups, you're almost starting from scratch in many ways, or you're starting from a different kind of level. So when looking at these options, I think it's important to think about, well, if these are the preferred paths, they really, really require work on behalf of the leadership, on behalf of the archivists to get to that point. So anyway, this is very interesting statistics to look at in terms of preferential options. Now, here's where we start to talk a little bit more about the practical archives side of the survey. We wanted to know, certainly ACWR wanted to know, what does the staffing look like? And I've already mentioned that we are looking at an unprecedented situation, right? With hundreds, potentially hundreds of archival collections needing to find a home, and potentially quite a lot of work, boots on the ground kind of work that has to be done within these repositories. So we asked several questions related to this. And first, of course, being, do you have an archival staff? Luckily, most of these women religious communities do, 60%. But there are a number that don't. And there are many reasons for that. Whether the archivist passed away and they haven't filled the position, it's a new archive or a young community. There's many reasons. But this is what we're looking at in terms of archival staffing. Now, the other important piece of this that we need to look at is what kind of staff and how many hours are they working? Are they part-time, full-time? 59 communities have professionally trained lay archivists on staff. And it appears that there's an interesting mix. Most are working at least full-time, between full-time, 30 to 40 hours a week. Typically. Some communities have identified that they have professionally trained sister archivists, far fewer of those, but a lot of what they called sister archivists, that they haven't had professional training, but they are a sister designated to be the archivist for the community. It's interesting that, we're not quite seeing half and half between lay archivists and sister archivists, but certainly in the ACWR membership, it is moving in that direction, where we have about 60% sister members and 40% lay members. in favor of more lay members in recent years. So that is shifting. But as you can see, the sister archivists typically are not working full-time. They are working part-time hours. And even more, you see sister volunteers or lay volunteers working hours. So what we can conclude about this is that the work of archivists within women religious archives, women religious repositories, it's heavily reliant on volunteer time, heavily reliant on sister archivists who are aging, generally speaking. And there was a great quote, and within the survey results and the special report, there are a number of quotes from the open-ended questions as well as from the focus groups that CARA held as a result of the survey. And one of them that really struck me was, as a lone arranger, I have to balance all aspects: preservation, arrangement, description, access, outreach, reference, and preparing for the future. So I'm sure many of our archivists here today are feeling the same thing, right? We're handling it all. But the key part of this that's different from archivists in other fields is this preparing for the future piece. This is a piece that takes an incredible amount of time, an incredible amount of work, in addition to all those other things that we normally do as archivists, okay? And these statistics show that we are relying on, in many cases, elderly sisters, volunteer sisters, to do the bulk of this work. And really, at the end of the day, and I have said this before, at the end of the day, this preparation piece in particular requires professionally trained full-time staff, especially when you're working on a timeline like this. Okay. So some questions that surprised me. One of them was about the archive's long-term financial sustainability. Interestingly, only 28%, almost 29% of communities said that financing the archives in perpetuity was a concern. And when I really thought about this question and that response, I thought, well, compared to many other departments within the congregation, the archives is very likely the smallest budget, right? I mean, it's probably very true that we are all dealing with very small budgets. And so I think often from the leadership perspective, you know, if you have a minimal budget, it might not seem like archives financial sustainability is a concern. However, the question really is, are your archives being appropriately funded? And if they are, great. But if they aren't, what does that actually look like? And what does it look like long term? That's part of the question here. But this is one question that surprised us a little bit to see that. This was an important question from the archivist perspective. Is your archivist involved in future planning? And by this, we mean primarily future planning for the archives, of course. And 65% said yes. But there are a number of communities that said no. Again, some of them may not have an archivist on staff or even a sister archivist, but it was encouraging to see this, that the conversations are happening and that the archivists are involved in this future planning. They should be. Even, you know, if you have a sister archivist on staff who's been there for years and is doing the best she can, I'm going to tell you, she's the one who knows your collection the best. She is the one. The archivist you have there is the one that knows the collection the best, and she can advise, and she or he can make recommendations. They can ask questions that you might not be thinking about. So this is an important thing. I think that was reassuring for us to see, but again, is an important question here that we should all consider. This was an additional sort of staffing kind of question, staffing future planning question that we thought was important to ask. Are leaders interested in having an archival consultant come? And that could be for any reason, for future planning, for assessing your policies and procedures, assessing other kinds of needs. 73 congregations said yes. The majority did say no, but 73 congregations said yes. And the one thing that I think was a takeaway from me is that, again, it's just the sheer numbers. So 73 communities are interested in an archival consultant. If you go on the SAA website, which is the Society of American Archivists, it's the National Archives group, and you go under the listing for archival consultants, there are 52 consultants listed. That doesn't even match the 73 communities who would be interested. And again, in our case, this may be double. It might be 150 who might need outside consultation. There are only 52 listed in the national directory. And of course, some of those have multiple archivists on staff, but they might be larger groups. But this is another indicator of a need that we will be seeing in the next 1 to 2 decades. Archival consultants to assist women religious congregations, and particularly archival consultants who have experience in women religious congregations, which is an even more rare thing. Okay, so when we think about this, again, it is a little bit of a shakeup in my mind. Like, wow, this is something that we need to think about. How can we address this? Because on the national level, this is an overwhelming statistic. Okay. Now, I want to go over some general statistics that emerged related to women religious archives. This is important for us to think about in terms of our own internal standards, our own collections, but also puts it in context, again, in terms of the national archival environment. We asked several questions about the size of archival collections. And this is a statistic that's very hard to determine, in part because some people answer in linear feet, some people answer in square feet, some people answer in boxes, and there's different shapes of archival boxes. But what we've been able to determine is that on average, the size of the archival collections, the actual records within women religious archives, is on average between 1,100 and 1,500 linear feet. In terms of physical storage space, the average is around 1,000 square feet. So if you're talking about physical space for storage, it's around, on average, 1,000 square feet. And in terms of number of standard archival boxes, we've got around 609 boxes. Again, this is somewhat relative because of the varying responses we received. And this information will be important too for some of those repositories that are making their plans, right? Some of those collaboratives, Boston College, Santa Clara, the Cleveland Initiative, there's several others. In terms of planning for space, okay, if they can build a building at this cost and it's this size, how many collections might they be able to take? Okay, this kind of information will help them with that, but is also good for us to know as well. Now, one interesting piece of information that emerged from the survey was about archival software. And we gave a number of options for people to respond. What are the primary software programs that they utilize, that our archivists utilize to manage collections, or a collections management system? The primary response was Microsoft Word, and the top 3 responses were Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, and Microsoft Access. Now, those are very useful programs, very useful tools. However, they are not archival programs, and they're not archival software. They're not meant to serve that purpose. So this is an interesting statistic, again, for the ACWR perspective, and in terms of looking at national trends, that our archivists are not utilizing archival specific CMS programs, collections management systems. And I don't think I get to it here. I do get to here. So, and more than 77% of archivists of women religious do not use a digital collections management system. Do not at all use a digital collections management system. I've already mentioned the Microsoft programs were the most commonly used. But in terms of archival systems, Past-Perfect, ArchiveSpace, and Access to Memory were cited most often. But as I've just mentioned, less than 33% of congregational archivists actually use some kind of archive-specific software. Okay, that is a low statistic compared to nationally. All right, let's go back to these archive stats again. Something that, again, I think was heartening for us to see is that it seems like women religious know that there should be a dedicated budget and they should have temperature and humidity controlled storage. The majority of communities have those things. They have a budget and they have temperature and humidity controlled storage. That's great. That's wonderful. that's ahead of other kinds of small archives in many cases. One of the findings that was perhaps surprising based on other feedback we've received is a question about digitization. So we asked if communities had an active digitization program, and the majority responded that they don't. So 60% said that they don't. And again, this is behind national trends in terms of archives overall. But it's very interesting because within the open-ended questions from both leadership and archivists, digitization is brought up over and over and over again. From the leadership perspective, in many cases, digitization is brought up as incorrectly as a solution. So let's digitize everything. That's not a feasible option. From the archivist perspective, it's brought up in many cases that they'd like to digitize, but they don't have the time. They want to facilitate access, but it's time consuming and they've got too many other things to do and not enough staff or not enough time. So this was an interesting question to look at, especially in light of some of those open-ended responses and conversation that revolved very heavily around digitization. Now, the one thing I want to touch on here is we asked several questions about policies and procedures. And the majority of women religious archives don't have an overarching collection policy, but they do very often have restricted and confidential files and policies related to those, legal and property files and policies related to those, as well as access policies. And so not that this is an overarching collection policy, but there are bits and pieces of an overarching policy that many congregations do have. So it's also a matter of, what else is missing? How else can we maintain administrative control? And then I've already mentioned a little bit about the CMS programs, but the majority of women religious archivists are utilizing inventories or catalogs or some kind of finding aid for intellectual control. Now, many of them are printed, they're printed out, but not necessarily managed with a CMS system. Okay. And for the archivists out there, the bane of our existence, born digital records. This is something that we're all worried about. Lay archivists, sister archivists, archivists of all kinds. Born digital records are things like emails, websites, in some cases, audio or visual material that's produced solely online. There's no printed copy. It's interesting, this question about whether or not our archivists are collecting this kind of material showed that 62% are collecting born digital material. But it was interesting that in the written feedback about this question, most archivists are actually just printing out the digital material. And they aren't necessarily actively collecting the digital content as digital content. And sure, in many cases that can be okay. But the majority of these items are being printed out. But the items that are being maintained as digital records are not being cataloged, and they're not being managed with a technical system, right? And there's all kinds out there, but they're not, there's no tech support for the majority of our archivists to be able to digitally manage large born digital collections. So this is another looming issue for all archivists, but especially for our women religious archivists. First off, collecting born digital material can be challenging, but then maintaining it once you have it is an additional challenge. We wanted to get some additional information about how collections are managed and accessed, as well as what kinds of collections are within women religious repositories. The first question was related to access. And essentially the question was something to the effect of, are your collections available for public researchers? Just over the majority, right? Where 56% said yes, but many said no. And again, I think there are many reasons for this. Staff time, certainly one of them. Concerns about confidentiality and what kinds of records should be kept confidential is for many of our women religious archivists a major concern. But this is where we open up the question and say, okay, you're keeping your collections relatively private now, but we need to think about in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years, who will be the primary users of these records. And at some point, it's very likely, maybe not now, but maybe sometime in the future, that there will be some kind of public access. So if anything, you should have, and we talked about this already, you should have policies and procedures that negotiate that accessibility question, right? You should be thinking about it. You should be forming policies and plans for this exact question, okay? Now, we asked the question about special collections to get to the root of this as well, okay? We talked about this public issue, making collections available to the public. We know that many of our congregational archives, they have internal information. They've got our board minutes, they've got our committee notes, they've got all these things that are related to the internal management of the community. But many, many, many of our collections relate to the ministries, right? The ministries, the schools, the healthcare institutions, the social service projects. Those are ministries that connected with the public. Those are ministries that are connected with communities outside the sisters. And so we asked this special collections question. We asked about social justice collections, underrepresented populations, people of color, for example, indigenous people, enslaved people. Do your collections relate to any of those topics? Well, as you can see, many of them do. Many of them do. And this is just getting to the special collections. This isn't even touching on, you know, and I'm sure many of the archivists can attest to this, the many schools that still exist. And the sisters have wonderful records of those students, the social service programs, etc. These collections are just further example of the value, the great value, not just to the internal communities, the sisters themselves, but of the people that they served. These are collections and histories of the people that the sisters have served. And so in my mind, and I say this always, archives are a ministry. They are an extension of the many ministries that the sisters have had over the many years that the communities have been in existence. It should be treated, the archives should be treated as a ministry, not just because you continue to serve the sisters and the public and the researchers, but because these collections represent these important people, the underrepresented groups, indigenous people, people who have been oppressed, the poor. These are people who are not traditionally cataloged, not traditionally represented in mainstream historical archives. So this was a great, really important question for us to show the further value of these collections and why they should be preserved over the long term. Some further questions that yielded some surprising answers for us. We asked a question about archival outreach work, and this could be everything from, you know, hosting an exhibit or doing an online project to being involved in archival communities. 54% of the archivists are actively engaging in archival outreach. Again, I think we can suspect that much of that is due to time. They just don't have the time. When they're working part-time and maybe have another job within the community, or You know, they're a lone arranger. There's only one archivist on staff. It's difficult to get that kind of work in there. This research request question that we asked was very interesting. Most archivists field up to 75 research requests per year. A lot of people cited about 25 to 50. That was the majority response, but up to 75 was for many archivists. And more than 12% of communities said they answer more than 150 requests per year. So when you're thinking about all the work that's involved with these archivists, you know, they're answering these questions. And often our archivists are not just doing the archival work, they themselves are the researchers, okay? They themselves are the researchers. So they're spending, in many cases, hours and hours to respond to an inquiry, in addition to all of those other tasks that they have to look at. So in looking at the responses to the direct questions, as well as the open-ended questions and the focus group comments, two primary concerns emerged from the survey. The first, unsurprisingly, is the long-term preservation and management of women religious archives, the very first. We need a plan, right? We don't know what we're going to do in 10 years. We don't know where the collection will be in 20 years. And the second concern, primarily cited by archivists, but also in part by leadership, was personnel. Lack of personnel, transitioning from sister archivists to lay archivists, whether that was something to consider, or how that could be done, or what's the most appropriate way to do that. Those were the two primary concerns. There were many others, but those were the two cited most often. So now what? That's the big question. And this, I covered many of the stats from the survey, not everything, but I think the most telling pieces of data that have emerged. But I want to now talk about, now that we have these responses and these answers, what can we do? What can we do? So the first thing I want to do is look at individually, either as an archivist or a leader or an archives liaison, or whoever you are, or whatever role you serve, what can you do? So the first, there's sort of four things here: assess, engage, explore, and act. First thing, assess your current realities in context. So what are your current realities? And how do they match up with what's happening nationally with other women religious archives? Take this information and engage leadership, other sisters, donors, friends, your archival allies, whoever you have. Educate them. 3, explore funding opportunities, explore relationships, old relationships and new relationships. And the fourth thing, take action and make a plan. So I'm going to talk about each of these individually. Step 1, this is the assess piece. Use the CARA survey as a model, okay? And by that I mean, ask yourself, can I answer these questions? If you can't answer some of the questions, think about why, and think about what you need to do in order to answer those questions. And some of it might be as simple as have a conversation. Have a conversation. It might be as simple as I need to find out what is a standard archival box so I know how large my collection is. So can you answer the questions? And when you do answer those questions, what do your responses tell you about your archive's needs? And everyone is different. Every community will have different needs. Okay. And once you know what those needs are, consider what your next steps would be. Okay. And that's what will take us to the ACT piece, but let's look at step 2. Step 2, use the survey as an advocacy tool. So I've already mentioned this, but engage with your sisters, your staff. Use the survey as a central talking point. Okay. You can take my PowerPoint and you can present it. Okay. Or send the link to this video. You can take the special report to your next staff meeting or your team meeting. Schedule a meeting to present this. Share it with your other archivists and leaders. If they're not on this call today and you think they need to know this, send it to them. Send it to them. I think one important thing to note is women religious archives, this is a niche field, okay? And when I say that, we all are aware of many of these issues. We all know what we're dealing with. But very few people outside of this niche field are aware of these challenges. So we have to be self-advocates. And while it's wonderful, we should all be extolling the great value of our collections, it's also our responsibility to educate those around us about the current reality, as well as the future reality, okay? So, and one thing that I was just talking with Lisa Schell, our current president, about yesterday was that, you know, for the lay archivists in particular, working in a women religious archive is far different than working in other kinds of archives. And there's reasons for that, certainly. Once for the fact that it's a religious repository, it's a Catholic repository, but because we are dealing with this reality, this current reality that many of us are employed as archivists and preparing a collection to transition, merge, or close. We are preparing for our own jobs to disappear in many cases. That is a totally different reality from where our other archival colleagues are at. A totally different reality. And the fact that we have lay archivists who are dedicated in this way, they're taking these jobs, they're working and actively, making these plans and doing the best they can do and really get the charism. Your archivists, your lay archivists are partners in mission. They are partners in mission. And I hope you're treating them as such, but you should be treating them as such. So an important piece here, use the survey as an advocacy tool. Step 3, perhaps just as important, use it as a fundraising tool. Take this data, extract your own data if you want from whatever you think is most relevant, compare it to your assessed reality, utilize it and cite this data in grant applications or in fundraising efforts. Go to your development folks and say, how can we work on this together? Work with your communicators, right? We need to educate, we need to explain. This is very much, all of this is very much educational tool. The survey is an educational tool. But I think it's most powerful when you are able to compare it to your own assessed reality. And so utilize the survey. Grants can support any number of projects: preservation and supplies, special projects, storage, this future planning idea, digitization projects, even consultants. So, and there are many, many opportunities at the local, state level, federal level. And by bringing these statistics and putting them into the language, it makes the case. It makes the case for funding, 100%. There is a demonstrated need. And the final step, and all of these kind of lead to this, use the CARA survey as an impetus for action. The archivists, ACWR, have been talking about this issue for decades. And I know because Veronica, our executive secretary, she went back in the ACWR archives and looked at the letters and at the correspondence between archivists and the leadership about this exact reality. And this was 20 to 30 years ago. And here we are. So this is the moment. Seize the moment. Apply for that grant. Start the conversation. Sign the agreement. Begin the project. Hire your archivist. Make a plan. Take some kind of action. And that's the part of this that I think many of us have been waiting. Many of us have been perhaps fearful of what that future might look like, but you have to take action. And the CARA survey is a great tool to make a step forward toward action. Now, so those were just some steps that I think all of us could take forward and say, okay, I have this information, now what do I do with it? Now, ACWR is going to do the same. Our board is committed to utilizing the CARA survey to guide our strategic planning efforts, clearly with a focus on archives in transition, but also something we wanted to know more about is how many young communities are out there? How many communities don't have an archive and would like to start one? we want to be there for them too. We want to be able to help educate and guide them through that process. We want to focus on additional education and mentoring for those who need it, both our sister archivists and our lay archivists who have never worked in a religious archive before. We need to focus heavily on advocacy and education, especially for our external constituents who don't understand this issue, and especially training our lay archivists about working in women religious archives and with all of the Catholic language that goes with that as well. We're going to explore funding opportunities and look at our updated membership program and how we can sustain ourselves long-term. So obviously we have communities that are merging. We have archivists, sister archivists who are retiring or they're passing away, fewer members. And not as a result of lack of programming, but as a result of this transition in the archivists in women religious archives. More lay archivists, fewer sister archivists, fewer archivists of women religious, period. So how do we sustain ourselves in the long term? We would like to enhance and expand our triennial conference offerings and also our between conference programming. This year with our webinar series, this was really the first time we've done something like this regularly throughout the year. We hope to continue that. And we're also considering hosting an Archives in Transition pre-conference workshop for our September 2024 conference. And this would be a workshop for those who really are on the cusp of this transition period or want to learn more about what's required. And they want to get documents, contracts, policies, ideas in order to do that and to do it in an educated and effective way. So we're hoping to host this Archives in Transition workshop. Many other ideas that we hope to discuss soon to have a new strategic plan moving forward for the next 3 to 5 years, as well as the decade moving forward. This is a transformational period for us. It has been over the past year and a half or so. And so one thing today that we would like to hear from you who are here and present at this meeting is, what from the survey would you like us to address? What ideas do you have? What questions do you have? And how can ACWR assist you in this transitional moment? But I think the one thing I want to end with here is that you're not alone. I mean, I think that's a big takeaway from this survey, is that we are not alone in this. We are all going to be facing this. We all, over the next decade or 2 decades. We're not alone, and ACWR is here for you. And so I'm going to open this up for questions, comments, discussion, and we're very anxious to hear from you. But here's my contact information if you need it or if you would like it. But certainly I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Feel free.
Could I pop in here?
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Casey. Hi. First, I just want to thank you for a very wonderful presentation, very full, lots to think about. And I want to speak, I guess, to all of the women out there. And there are a few men, but I know some of you, I'll be 80 in the next couple months, and I've got a lot of company in that department. And I've been an archivist like many of you after another career of teaching or whatever, social work, nursing. And I am so thrilled that people like Casey and people like the ACWR are using their great resourcefulness and collaborative spirit and their really generous hearts. They're smart, they're committed to our archives. They appreciate us even more than we do sometimes. And that's wonderful. And when Casey said we're not alone, really we're not. I think the only thing is that sometimes we don't value the treasure that's in our archives, but it is part of our mission to make sure that our story, the true stories, are available in 50 years, 100 years. So I just want to say, embrace these folks, lay women and lay men who are willing to help us. We, people like me, carry the culture, and the stories, the history. They carry the knowledge about archives, the science of how to make sure that they do survive and are useful. We need to work together, and that gives me great hope. So it was a lot to take in, and we all face the same problem of getting leadership on board, because we know they all have a lot on their plate. But frankly, this is probably one of the most important things on the plate of every religious congregation, whether or not you're new and have new members coming or facing completion. Your archives will be what lasts beyond you, 100 years, 500 years. What will they think? What will they know? Where will they go to find out the real story? Not the Sally Field Flying Nun story, the real story, not all the crazy ones that are out there in books and in movies, in wherever. The real story, because you know, it's our story. It's the story of the church. It's the story of the country. It's a story of women who chose a path that wasn't the norm and really realized their fullness of their being by answering that call. So I'm so grateful for the ACWR, and I'm glad to be a part of it. And I urge, if you don't belong to it, just do it. That there's a huge resource there, and it's available and getting updated all the time. So I want to stop because I could go on and on and on, but I'll stop. But please support your lay archivist. Pay them well, give them cookies, do whatever.
Thank you, Sister Mary. Oh, you're wonderful, Sister Mary. You hit it all. You did. You hit it all. No, and I think I agree. I think it's very important. Something that I, as a lay archivist who has come into a women religious archive, and I've been lucky enough to have the sister archivist here with me. And as you say, that my sister archivist has been in the hospital since Friday, Sister Louise, and it just breaks my heart because we have been partners. We have been partners over these years, and she has taught me so much. And I think I've taught her a little, but she has taught me so much, and it's really a wonderful relationship. And I think it's so important that if you are able, want to, have to get a lay archivist, do it while the sister archivist is still there. Do it if you can. It makes a world of difference, truly. Thank you. Anybody else, please feel free. It was in the chat, or if you want to speak out or raise your hand.
Yeah, Casey. Yeah, Lynn Osick, Society of the Sacred Heart. Thanks so much for this. And there's so many big questions here, but actually one of your last comments provoked a different question for me. And that's about these new communities. Where are they in terms of ACWR? Do any of them belong? Did any of them, are they at all represented in the questionnaire?
So yes, some of them were represented in the questionnaire. That's easy to answer because they explicitly said, we don't have an archive. We'd like to form one. You know, they're younger communities. In recent years, we have connected more with CMSWR and some of the communities there with that group. And yes, they are some new communities who have not established an archive, or they're, you know, relatively young communities, I should say, who have not established an archive and they're interested. Some cloistered communities that have some records that they're dealing with. And actually our mentoring committee has been assigned a couple of these communities to advise them through that process. We've also connected with a few international communities in Africa and maybe even South America, who again are younger communities, you know, maybe several decades old, that don't have an archive or a repository, but they're looking to have a sister archivist or start a repository. So that is, you know, they're not nearly as many of them, but certainly that's still a need that has to be fulfilled. And we are ready and willing to assist in any way with those groups. Oops. Anybody else?
Casey, has there been any more connection with LCWR about leadership supporting their archivists?
Yeah, so we've been, as many of you know, ACWR has tried to connect with LCWR for many years about this issue. I think we have a couple of great contacts who have been leaders within religious communities, and they are trying to make some conversations happen with us. We've heard that there might be some focus, more of an archives focus on one of the future LCWR meetings, although we don't know a lot of information about that yet. So yeah, we're slowly chipping away and making some progress, but of course, as we've already mentioned, there's so much on the plates of the leadership that at times it's very difficult to get a seat at that table. But we're really trying to make an effort in that way. And my hope is too that with our webinar series, our conference in 2024, as well as some new initiatives, we'll make some further connections with LCWR. So stay tuned on that front. Okay, I think we had a question in the chat here, question or two. Oh, an archival consultant. So what does an archival consultant do? Well, an archival consultant can do a whole heck of a lot of things, and it just depends on really whether you want them to come in and review what you currently have going on in your archive and make a plan, and it could be a short-term plan or a long-term plan. Sometimes archival consultants are hired as processing archivists, or they'll do short-term kinds of projects. It's more likely that they'll just do some consulting work in the sense that they'll make an assessment and they'll give you a plan or give you some suggestions. But really it's really defined by you and that consultant. So it just would depend on what you foresee as the need within your archive. Yeah, is it Agnes? You have a question?
Yes. Question, are you a regular trained archivist? And then you had an interest in women's religious archival work? Is that how it goes?
So I'll speak for myself and then generally what I've seen with some of our lay archivists, but
Okay.
Generally speaking, a lot of the lay archivists have general archival training, whether that's an MLIS degree, a library of science degree with archives concentration, or sometimes public history or history routes to become archivists. It seems like a lot of our archivists kind of fall into women religious archives, not necessarily that there's a dedicated interest, but so many of these collections connect to, as Sister Mary mentioned, women's history, social justice, education, local history. I think that it's very appealing for lay archivists within these collections. They're small collections, manageable collections. There are ways for these lay archivists to learn a lot and to get really good, solid experience with these repositories. And the one thing that I've said is that because this is such a unique scenario, for many of our lay archivists, preparing a collection to transition is really actually very good professional experience. And so, I think that there are a lot of appealing ways that lay archivists, or reasons lay archivists would want to get involved with the religious archives. One thing I think ACWR hopes to do is to advertise these positions a little bit more and promote, the benefits and value of working for these communities. And I'll also mention the majority of lay archivists that I have worked with are not Catholic. But you know what? They feel just as passionately about the history and the collections as the sisters do. So it's really, really encouraging to see that.
Okay.
Does that answer your questions?
Yes. Can I ask another one?
Sure.
What's the best way to find an archivist?
Sure. So there are lots of ways, lots of places to advertise an archival position. The first thing I would do is connect with some of the national groups like SAA, Society of American Archivists, as well as whatever your regional archival group is. There are several regional archival groups. Mine is MARAC, which is Mid-Atlantic Regional Archives Conference. There are several others representing the US. And then also just advertising locally on online sources. Indeed.com is a big one. And there are other like sort of heritage or museum archives websites for a lot of regions. So there are a lot of places that you could advertise those positions.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Archives Gig is another one. Yeah, Veronica's listing a few. Lots of places. Okay, let's see here. Another question. Oh, just a comment. What Sister Mary said is so relevant right now. Kathy is a lay archivist. She wishes she could talk with leadership. Okay, another comment. It would be really helpful to those of us who are only using Microsoft products if ACWR were to be able to offer some guidance or formal training on archival software, pros and cons, features. That's a great idea. There are some, I will say that there are a few resources out there that do look at archival software and make comparisons between the different kinds. Some of them are, you know, just like Excel spreadsheets, and it lays out, you know, these are the functionalities, these are the costs, these are the kinds of details you might need to know. But I think, yeah, that's a great idea for ACWR to look at that question and make some recommendations about that. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Yeah, Pam.
Pam has a question.
My question, you alluded to, you know, policies related to access to the archives. And are there samples, are there articles written on that? Because I think that's a really important educational piece, you know, for leadership as we look to the future of our archives. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a couple of years ago, I think we had done a little campaign via the ACWR listserv asking for some sample policies and procedures. I'd have to look to see if we have access ones specifically. I imagine we probably do. But, you know, what we should do is advertise that those are available. They should be on the website, I believe. Veronica may have that answer to that question. But I do that's a question on the resources page, according to Veronica. I think that is a question that deserves further insight, recognition, et cetera, from ACWR. You know, the access policy question, you know, what are appropriate access policies? What are appropriate, you know, confidentiality policies, et cetera. Great ideas for future webinar series, webinars, as well as conference topics. But that's something that we're trying to do, is try to gather some of these resources and make them available on our website. That's something that we're hoping to do more of.
I'd like to chime in just for a second too, Casey.
Yeah, please.
Pam, we are actively, my name is Lisa Schell, I'm the current president right now, and we have a committee dedicated to revamping our references and resources page on our website. So this is something that we recognize is super important and a need for the community. So we will be reproducing and sharing content that is archival approved. And especially when you're talking about access policies, a lot of that is also contingent on local, regional, state, could be international regulations. If you have collections, depending on the type of content that you have in your collections. And so we want to be able to provide some standards, but we also need to recognize that those often need to be refreshed on a pretty regular basis. And they are actually very congregational specific. And I would highly recommend that no matter what you come up with, that your leadership signs off on that. So if you have a turnover in leadership, they should also get a chance to approve or refresh those as well. So yeah, we definitely recognize the need to share those resources.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Those are great points. One thing I want to mention, just someone about advertising archival positions. LinkedIn is a great resource, as well as any local colleges or universities that have archival programs. You know, they've got new graduates coming out looking for jobs, and it sounds like we'll be hiring lay archivists, consultants, et cetera, and certainly those young folks can assist with that as well. Okay, just looking for if there's any more hands up.
I'll just add one more thing in regards to hiring a professional archivist or consultant. One of our webinars in the upcoming year in 2023 will be about that very topic, and we're hoping to host that in February. Everything from what inspired the priorists to actually move in that direction, to engaging with the director of that department where archives falls under, to engaging with HR to figure out exactly how you go about writing that job description and how you go out and vet and recruit people who will be a good fit. And then all the decision points that it takes to get to the hire and the paperwork and the job description to get to the point to hire somebody. So that has been a very popular topic among our webinars and our board meetings. And so we're going to be offering that as a webinar this year, coming up very soon.
Yeah, Virginia.
Hi, this is just a comment about the policies and procedures that when I was working on those for my community, I found the ACWR listserv really helpful. You know, not so much to give you the whole policy and procedure, but on specific points, you know, what can people share, how long material is restricted after a sister dies. And many people would share, you know, that portion of their policy, and it's great to get a spectrum and think about why, you know, why are there these differences and what do we want to do? So if people are working on those, I would encourage you to ask questions in the listserv, and you'll get good, helpful feedback.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great point. The listserv is a wonderful resource. We get so many great questions and a lot of really good feedback, and it does give you a great range of experiences and opinions in some cases about really what's appropriate. And you know, then you can make an informed decision. So it's a really great resource. Okay, well, I hope if there's no other questions, or if there are, please feel free to contact the ACWR National Office. Veronica, myself, Lisa, any of us on the board, we would be more than happy to talk with you further, answer some questions. I hope and pray all of you will take the CARA survey, our archive survey, and do something with it. I think that's my main takeaway for you today. Just do something with it, have a conversation, make a plan, do what you can do, engage with somebody, educate somebody. That's what really was the whole purpose for us to be involved with this project, is to just use it as an impetus. And so that's really my call to you. And I will be sure, yes, we're going to circulate the survey and the presentation and the webinar today. So thank you all so much for attending, and I wish you all a blessed Christmas and Happy New Year. And we will see you all soon. Thank you.